And we're plugged in with Maura Collins. Thanks for joining me today, Rick.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
Rick Gross, how are ya?
I am doing fantastic, thank you. I'm having a good day so far.
Awesome. I'm so excited that you decided to take my invitation on coming on the podcast.
Well, I am honored to get the invite, actually. I know how long you've been talking about this, and this has been a dream of yours, and it's really, really cool to see it actually come to fruition.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's so good to have you on the show today. When I met you, I think it was a little over a year ago, I was like, wow, this guy, he has a voice for radio.
Yeah, well, I'd like to blame it on my years of high school theater, I guess. So I just really enjoy, talking with people. I've actually, have stage experience. And, yeah, I don't know. The voice is natural. It came with the body, so.
That's awesome. I have a lot of theater experience, too. That's funny. So when I met you, I thought that you were in the fellowship a lot longer than you were, and because I just felt this sense of you being so spiritually connected and grounded and genuine and just so positive.
Well, I'll tell you, I have always had a pretty strong spiritual foundation. And I always just find the joy in things. And honestly, it's a good and a bad thing sometimes. I try to be joyful. I look for the bright side of situations or circumstances that I'm in. But at the same time, too, that can cause me to kind of turn a blind eye to some, real issues that are going on either in my life or in those around me. So I've got to walk that fine line and be really conscious of, the idea that, hey, I can be joyful. And that comes from a place where, I try to count my blessings as often as possible, but also not miss out on, if I run into somebody who's struggling with something, that I don't just move past that because I don't want it to, affect my good mood or anything.
So tell me how spirituality has played a part in your life. Did you grow up in the church to present day? I mean, is it something that's been in your family? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, actually, I grew up in the church. My dad was always in a leadership position at the churches I was at. I grew up in non-denominational churches, so that just means we weren't affiliated with any, specific sect or, part of Christianity or, being a Protestant or anything. And so I kind of always had that foundation built into me. And, I actually went to Christian school in elementary school and really had the foundation of who God was. My higher power as God, the creator of the universe, has always been there. And as I got older, I, really felt a tug to actually go into some type of position, full time with that. But, I hit my teenage years and then my 20s and kind of went off and did my own thing for a while. But, underlying and all that stuff was always that foundation that I had all along in knowing who God was. So, yeah, even though the spiritual side of me wasn't always at the forefront, even though that wasn't always something that I regularly acknowledged, it was something that was always there.
Wow, that's awesome. So how did you get the opportunity to live your dream with the church now?
It's actually a really cool story. So I had really felt probably since I was about 14 or 15 that I wanted to go into some type of full-time ministry position. I didn't know what it was. And there was actually a period of my life where I was getting ready to go. I was actually going to go to like a Bible college. But there were some circumstances that I experienced at a few churches I was at, and, nothing that was, personally detrimental, but I just watched some things play out where, churches were split and relationships were damaged because of poor decisions that people in leadership made. And then I watched how people within the church reacted to each other. And I was like, man, I don't want to do that. Like, that just does not seem like something that, I want to be a part of. So, I went to school for a little bit. That didn't really work out. Actually did a little more partying than I did going to class. And actually realized I got to a point in my life where I needed somebody to tell me what to do. So I joined the Navy. And in that, I was able to actually build some discipline. Spent 5 years in the Navy. After I got out, I moved back here, got a couple jobs, and actually joined a church probably about 6 months or so after I got out of the Navy, and instantly just was like, wow, because I hadn't been really deeply or actively involved in a church in probably 5 or 6 years. And so I found this church, loved it. We had an amazing dynamic leader. I hadn't experienced anything like that before. And so I gradually started this process again of becoming more involved. I looked for opportunities to serve both in and outside of the church, and just started praying. Hey, I felt the tug, back into ministry, and there were some circumstances that happened at a job I was at, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall that I was going to be leaving. And I'm like, well, I don't know what my next is going to be. So I started praying. I put out a couple feelers at some friends I had made at the church and said, hey, if you know anyone that's hiring, let me know. I just don't want to do sales anymore, because I had done sales for so long. And I had a person in leadership approach me and say, hey, so I hear you're probably going to be leaving your job. Would you be interested in a position here? And I literally got in my car and just started crying, because I had already kind of had a conversation with God where I was like, I know that I'm not going to be able to get a job there because I don't have a degree. I don't have a degree in ministry, so I guess I'll have to go to college and then wait for the doors to open. And God was like, sorry, I got different plans for you. So they offered me the job, and about 2 months later, I was able to step into a position. Actually, my first position at the church was in the finance office. And I'm actually an extrovert to like the 1000th percent. So I love being around people, and I love building relationships, and I love the energy from that. But I got to a point where I'm sitting in an office all day staring at spreadsheets and numbers, and I can function there, but that's just not my sweet spot. So they actually moved me out of the role I was in, and I got to serve with volunteers. And the church I was at, prior to COVID, we had about a 250 person volunteer team that I got to lead at our main campus. And it was awesome. I loved it. I loved the people I served with. We were there to create a welcoming environment every Sunday. So we got to serve the people that came in, whether it was coffee or just saying, hey, and a high five. And it was really, really awesome. And, I tell people every day I go to work, it's my dream job. And every day is different. My personality is one of those where I don't like the same old over and over again. So I get a job where literally there is nothing that's the same. So now I'm living a dream that I had, and I love every day I go in. I love the people I get to work with, and I just love the purpose and the mission of where I'm at.
That's amazing. So how does this fuel your recovery? Now, I mean, we've talked about the relationship and how your higher power is so personal and amazing to you, and we're blessed, right? Amen to that. But how has this made your recovery so deep and just, other than going to 12-step program, how have you taken your job and made that a stronger part of your recovery? Does it overflow? Does your cup overflow into your recovery from your job?
It absolutely does. What's interesting is that as I actually tried the 12-step program a couple times, and each time I wasn't ready. I went in and I picked out everything that just didn't line up with what I believed or what I thought, and nitpicked all these things and said, well, this isn't what it is. But I actually had a friend of mine at work when I decided to say, listen, my life has to change. I'm tired of damaging the relationships that are closest to me, and I need to take active steps, and it's worked for other people, so I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to step into this 100%. And a friend of mine lent me a book, and it was all about digging into the spirituality behind the 12 steps. And what I found is that looking at the 12 steps, first off, it lined up perfectly with what I already believed. It lined up perfectly with the person that I was already aiming to be with my relationship with God. And it dug even deeper to show that really the 12 steps aren't just how to move out of recovery from the addiction of a substance or anything. It's actually how to be a good person. It's actually how to be a good functioning member of society in a way that you're lifting other people up and you're putting others before yourself, and you're owning the things in you that aren't right in there, and repairing relationships that are broken. And when you do something wrong, realizing that and stepping in and looking to fix whatever that is. So as I dug deeper and deeper and further into that, I realized, oh my gosh, so they actually walk hand in hand with each other. And it's so neat because I've had an opportunity to share my struggles with people at the church. And it usually comes up in conversation where somebody just shares a moment or something that they're going through. And I get to look at them and say, hey, I know what you're doing. I'm actually struggling with the same thing, or I'm struggling with something very similar to that. And it's so cool to see that connection. And, I believe that, because a lot of times you'll hear the question like, well, why does God let bad things happen to people? Or why does God let bad things happen to good people? And, God allows us to function in the world that we're in, and we experience good and bad things. But in those bad things, it actually creates connection points between us and others that gives us these genuine opportunities to look at somebody in the eye and say, I know what you're going through, and actually mean it.
That's awesome. That is such a spiritual connection. So one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show is to show people that the spiritual side of your recovery is so important. Whether your higher power is God or whatever it may be, you can't just go to meetings. You have to sink your soul into whoever or whatever your higher power is to really feel that connection. Because at the end of the day, when I picked up a drink with 10 years clean, I wasn't talking to my higher power, who I call God, and saying and praying and saying, please, God, take this urge away from me and let me pick up the phone and call someone in recovery. So what you're explaining is going to give someone the inspiration to get connected spiritually outside of a 12-step meeting, because meetings are great and awesome and everything, but I'm talking about being plugged in outside, using the 12 steps, being plugged in and living your dream, right? So because of your role within your spirituality and your recovery, it ultimately, to me, sounds like it mended a lot of relationships. If you don't mind me asking a little bit, how did it help with your family, like your wife and your kids in that relationship?
Well, over the years, my addiction had caused a lot of friction, and it caused a divide between my wife and I, especially in the area of trust, because a lot of what I was doing, I was hiding from her, along with everybody else, my parents, my friends, people that I was in accountability relationships with, close friends, brothers, people that I would call brothers, and I wasn't inviting them into that because I didn't want to change. Because I was letting the substance take over and rule what it was. And it really did cause a lot of damage. I mean, this last time I remember the way that my wife talked to me, she's never talked to me that way before. And I was really fearful that might be the end of the relationship. And I'll tell you that I believe that if both of us didn't have a solid spiritual foundation in God already, I don't know that she would still be with me. Because I just brought so much dishonesty into that relationship. And, it's taken a long time to build that back. You can lose trust in an instance. It just takes one thing and all of it's gone. And it takes forever to build all that trust back. So I've been little by little building that trust back with my wife. Her name's Jen. And, luckily by the grace of God, Jen has given me that opportunity to gain that trust back. 'Cause I know there's other people that walked in my shoes that didn't have that same opportunity. The hard thing for me was I couldn't believe that somebody that I loved and cared about so much that I would treat this way. And I had to get to a point where I wanted to do everything that I could to make sure that never happened again. And so, like you said, just outside of the meetings helped a lot. People that I knew were going through the same thing that could relate to what I was saying. And, for so long, I just sat and listened because I knew that I needed to gain wisdom and knowledge and experience from people that had gone before me in it. And then I started to live it out and little by little take and move through the steps. And I did that with the help of others. But I also had to be open and honest with people outside of any type of 12-step program. My coworkers, there are people that I work with at the church that hold me accountable, that ask me questions. And see, the tough thing about accountability is, it's something that everybody needs, but it's something that we don't all want. We don't want people to ask us questions that we don't want to answer. But I need that because it keeps me honest with myself. It keeps me honest with my wife and my family, and it keeps me honest with the people that are around me.
That's amazing. There's a lot of forgiveness too, because your wife's not in the program. So she has to be able to reap the benefit of you being in the program. Like they used to call meetings self-help groups. So we have that benefit of the free therapy that 12 Steps provides. I'm currently going through a little bit of grief and a little bit of trauma. And I'm not ready to go back into the church yet, because then I'll see the families, right? And then there's part of me, and I'm just sharing a little bit of my truth, that feels a lot of guilt about when I was using, that God wasn't with me. And I remember going to a church and praying one day and saying how sorry I was to God for being an addict, right? And then when I came back into the church and met this man that was one of us, in recovery, and he started his own church. It was really cool. They had their own motorcycle club and all that. I got baptized. So I was baptized Catholic and then baptized again Christian as an adult. And I felt like my higher power never left me. Even when I thought that I left God, God was with me. And maybe I'll get to the point where I'm ready to come back into a church atmosphere and be able to deal with the grief and loss. I know you've had some struggles with, loss recently and stuff like that. How is your spirituality been able to have you carry on and, relieve that anxiety and the grief and the pain? How do you deal with that on a spiritual level?
Well, first off, I mean, grief is never easy to navigate through. And for me, a lot of times I would use something to kind of cover it up, because I didn't want to feel bad. I want to always feel joyful and happy. And so I would often use something to kind of cover that up. And so I had to really learn or relearn how to process through honest emotion, and that it's okay. But for me, I just know that God is always with me, just like you said. I found in my life, I walk with God, and then there's times where I wander away, and it doesn't happen all at once. It's these little tiny baby steps that get me there. And so I take these little baby steps, and all of a sudden I turn around and I'm like, how did I get here? This isn't where I want to be. I want to be over there. But it happens so incrementally that I don't realize it. So what I've had to learn to do is to go back to those places where I remember feeling the presence of God and dwell in those moments too. And when I need to restart, those are the places and the points that I restart from, and then move forward in my relationship and just know that. But, God has been a comfort to me through those tough times, through the loss that, that I've felt and suffered over the last year. God has been an overwhelming presence. It's been in some ways an audible voice, maybe not necessarily like, they show in the movies with like the booming, like, I am with you, not like that, but it usually comes through other people, through the relationships that I have and the encouragement that I get from others. I got to hear so much, because I ended up posting things on social media, and the outpouring that I had of care, people I hadn't talked to in years, sending their condolences and care and thoughts and prayers were just really comforting. And just knowing that, people, I think deep down, people really do care about each other. We don't have always the best ways of showing that, but I do believe that deep down inside, somewhere in there is that. So, obviously I had to relearn basically how to process through the grief and process through those negative emotions, because it's just not something that's natural or that I want to travel to or dwell in. But it's been a good experience. I grew stronger through some of those things as well. And I learned things in myself and mechanisms that I can use too when I get to that point, and people I can call and talk to that I know is going to be a constant source of encouragement, that's going to, lay things out or make things clear sometimes when I try to make them muddy.
That's awesome. So where do you see yourself in the next few years within the church, your role, or do you have like come on, tell us the secret. Is there a plan? What's next for you?
Well, it's not a secret. I don't mind telling anybody. So, the way that our church is set up is we actually have multiple campuses. We have a hub church where we broadcast out of, and that's where the messages come from. But then we also have satellite campuses, because we realized, and it's so weird. Like, we live in St. Petersburg, and people won't travel more than like 10 minutes anywhere. It's so bizarre. People that live in other states and other cities, they'll drive 25, 30 minutes sometimes to get to work. And then, you live in St. Pete, it's like, hey, yeah, we're going to go to Tampa. Like, Tampa, oh my gosh, it's so far away. Like a 20 or 25 minute drive is all of a sudden this big, long thing. So we decided that we wanted to plant campuses where people are at. And one of the things that I would love to do is be a campus pastor one day. I would love to be able to lead a campus of people. I feel like God's called me to that. I love building relationships with people and getting to know them. I love listening to where people are at and then trying to help them get to what's next for them, or to help them get through something or to walk through something. One of the things that is kind of a good and a bad thing, that I have to figure out how to harness too, is when I listen to people, when I hear who they are, and when I do that, I gotta be careful to kind of live in that moment a little bit and not move past it too much, and also just not go in trying to give them a solution. It's about listening and being there just to listen and offer some advice if they need it. But that's my hope. One day I'd love to be a campus pastor at one of our campuses.
What do your kids think of this? Of you? Are you a superhero?
I think my kids like me, right? I got a 12-year-old, so he is like on the verge of being a teenager, but, I love my kids. I have a wonderful relationship with both of them. I've got 2 boys, 12 and 9. They bring me so much joy. You spoke about getting baptized. My oldest son came to my wife and I about a week ago and said he was ready to get baptized, and they're doing a thing at our church at the end of the month. And I was elated to hear that he's taking that step in his relationship with God. And my youngest son it's so funny because my oldest son is an introvert. So he just kind of wants to hang out by himself sometimes. But my youngest son is just like me. He's a feeler, he's a hugger, he's a cuddler. By all indications, I believe my kids like me. They might have something else to say, but I'm almost positive that they like me, and they love the job that I have. They like my oldest son. We've been at this church now for a little over 12 years. And when we started, my son was 3 months old. And now my son just started serving in the kids area that he grew up in. Like it's my mind's blown. Just, I can't believe that much time has gone by, but it is really neat to see him living out his faith in that way.
And they say that kids are a product of their parents. So when I was growing up, I didn't really realize that until I have 2 boys, one's 15 and one's 12. And when people say, oh, your 12-year-old, such a good kid, you're doing such a good job with him, I was just like, okay, people are making small talk, but they really are a mirror of the way that we grew up. And I was always told that, go to church and praise God on Sunday and, do the right thing and all that stuff, and do unto others as you would have done to you. Like these little cliches that were actually great prayer, right? Prayer into action. So when I met you, there was a magic about you. I could see you leading a church. I would love to come. I think that you embody what is done outside a 12-step program as far as living that spiritual dream in a soft, kind way. You're not coming at me and saying, hey, Maura, I'm a holy roller and all this stuff, but just the way you are and your compassion towards people, it's a positive, infectious thing. So for me, positivity breeds positivity, right? So the way you treat someone is a contagious thing. So when we're in a meeting, let's be positive because it shows a newcomer the program works. So how do you spread that positivity within the church, much like you do in a 12-step program? How do you go about that?
Well, one of the things I mentioned earlier is God created me in a way where I'm an extrovert. So I get energy from being around people.
Yes.
And being around people, it brings me so much joy, and I just try to live that out. But to be honest, it's not just how I'm wired. I've realized if I try to do something that's outside of my higher power, if I try to do something on my own effort or in my own power, I usually burn out. It's usually something that I can sustain for a little bit, but then after a period of time, I'm just not able to go on anymore with it. So I actually had it backwards for a really long time. And I think a lot of people do, especially when you start talking about God and when you start going to church, and it's this idea of like, well, I have to do all these things so then God will like me more, or I have to do all these things so then I'm a good person by God's standards. But actually for me, the deeper that I got in my relationship with God, and with me, it's actually, relationship with God through his son, Jesus, the more that I've lived in that stuff just comes natural. And I think that because I've tried it the other way, where it's like I had all these like things going on, and So I've got to go fix all these things. And I've had people that I invite them to church and like, well, I got a lot of stuff I got to take care of before I come back to church. And it's like, well, do you like go in and try to fix your car before you bring it to the mechanic, or do you just bring it to the mechanic and let the mechanic fix it? And so I know that when I'm with people, it just brings me a lot of joy. And I get joy experiencing that joy in other people as well.
That's amazing. I love that. The joy part, right? Oh, that word. We don't use it enough, right? So that being said, do you do Bible studies? Are you into that?
I do. So I do some on my own. I have the Bible app, and by far that's the best tool that I've seen, because you can get on your phone. It sends you reminders. You could do anything. You could do a book. You could do a topic. You could find something that's geared towards a demographic. But that's a really easy way to do it. But I actually, because I grew up hearing the Bible all the time, and I remember one of the things that I heard over and over again was, well, the Bible's the living word. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, because the words are the same on the pages all the time. But what I found is that the words don't change. I change. And so I could hear something 99 times, and on that 100th time, it means something completely different to me because of a situation or a set of circumstances that I just went through. So yeah, I lead some. I actually lead some at our church. So there are some groups that I get a chance to lead, which I love, and I've actually been doing that for, oh man, probably the last 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
I love teaching. That's like, we actually have classes, a set of 4 classes that we do just to help people understand who we are as a church, and kind of describe to them the landscape of opportunities that they have to invest in their relationship with God through our church. And I get to teach those, and it is one of my most favorite things to do, because once again, I'm a theater kid, so put me up in front of people and I'm going to enjoy it. But also, I love I try to communicate the passion that I've been able to experience and seen others experience, so that other people can be captured by that as well.
So plug the church. Go ahead. Give us the website.
Yeah, so actually, I am a full-time staff member at Bridgepoint Church. It's bridgepointfl.com. We have 3 campuses. We had a couple campuses, and then COVID happened, but now we actually have 3 campuses, and one of them is about ready to open in Seminole. We also have one in the Tyrone area and one in downtown.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to check you out.
Yeah, please do.
In person, because
absolutely.
I know a lot of people from recovery that talk great things about the church. So I'm really excited to check that out. And if you had to give a hope shot out there to a newcomer, someone coming back, someone that is listening that maybe isn't in recovery, maybe they're a parent of an addict, or someone that's not sure, what would that hope shot be as far as the connection with your higher power, or in your recovery, finding your way back into a spiritual lifestyle? What would that be?
The first step that I had to be willing to take is submission. I had to recognize that I was a broken person, but that is not something that comes naturally to people. For me, I had pride and ego that were constantly, battling against it. Plus I had that little tiny voice in my head that said, you can't tell anyone about that, because if you do, you're going to lose your status, or people are going to think less of you, or, oh my gosh, what if they know this about you? And it's that voice that just stays there. So we continue to suppress and hide those things until sometimes they bubble over, or sometimes they start to bleed out into other areas of our lives. And that's what causes us so much headache and heartache. And that's what damages the relationships and people around us. So if I could say anything, it would just be, regardless of where you're at, just recognizing that we're all broken. Every one of us brings brokenness into relationships, whether it's something that we caused ourselves from choices that we made, or sometimes it's circumstantial. Sometimes our brokenness comes from circumstances that we were in. But either way, I believe that God designed us to interact with each other and build relationships with each other so that we could identify that brokenness in each other, but then find that wholeness in relationship with Him.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you again for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much,
I
Maura.
appreciate it, and I love you, my friend.
I love you too, Maura.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us.